Hello! Welcome to the live chat. We're here just like we always are on Sunday nights.
Late,
just like we always are on
as usual. What else do you expect from us? We like to keep up with your expectations. So we're talking about overwriting and underwriting today. I hope that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If not, it is now.
I was like, I think that's what we're talking about. But I told you guys the first question, you didn't say anything about it, so I was like, I think I know it. All right, so the first question that we're going to go down in the line and answer is whether you are an overwriter or an underwriter, and then if you do you know, is there like a specific thing that causes you to overwrite or underwrite? So do you write too much description or like not enough world building or whatever? So first person I have is Erin.
Okay, I'm a definite overwriter. I did a video about this the other day. I always end up having to cut about 20,000 words or something ridiculous like that at the end of a manuscript. And I think, at least for the last one, it was because during my draft, I kind of just like let it flow. So I often have too much, like almost extra words. You know what I mean? Like there's like whole sentences I can cut, because what I tend to do, and like Kelly pointed this out before, but I still do it every single time I draft, is like show something and then also tell it. Or like show. And I'm like, okay, I don't need 3 descriptions of the same thing. Even if it like, the time I think it sounds like poetic, or like it sounds so flowy and descripty and I like it. And then I go back and I'm like, okay, I don't need like 3 descriptions of the same damn thing. So I end up cutting 2. And like even my agent said this about the last one. She's like, there's just a lot of unnecessary descriptions. So just go through and cut. And I think it was like something like 15 or 20,000 words that I ended up cutting. So
I think that's a really common problem. Like the showing and telling kind of thing. Yeah. Of showing in multiple ways.
Yeah, but I think like realizing that you're doing it is the important thing. And so it took me a while, and it took a few people pointing it out, but I finally figured out that I can go back and do that before someone is like, hey, you need to cut all of this, right? So yeah.
Then I have Kelly.
I am definitely an underwriter. I would love to be an overwriter. From like my standpoint, it seems like a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And I'm sure it's the opposite if you're the other way. But it varies from book to book what I underwrite, I think. Like where I'm most prepared, I tend to come off just general underwriting. But like if I haven't done enough world building, I'll just skip it altogether and come back to it later kind of thing, and create a lot of work for myself in the future. So that's pretty much my go-to.
Megan?
When I first started writing, I was a hardcore underwriter. Like every draft would be like really stretching it to get to 50,000, even though it's a fantasy. But when I was thinking about it in preparation for this chat, I realized that the last 2 or 3 that I've written have come out at about the right word count. But the world building and subplots are always really severely underwritten. And then there's a lot of like I really like how I sound in writing sentences where it's like, does this poetic thing need to be done? Do I need to repeat that word 3 times? I have to cut a ton of that. That's a weird in between.
Yeah, I am kind of similar. Like I used to always think I was an underwriter because my drafts would be really short, but I realized they'd like progressively been getting like each first draft I write is longer than the last one was. And like the one I'm working on right now, like I know is going to be really long because I like hit the like 25% mark and it was already like 30,000 words. And I was like, what's happening? Way longer than anything I normally write. But I think it's a similar problem for me. I tend to not write enough plot a lot of the time, or like not enough happens within each scene. But like I use too many words for the things that are there. So like I think that's part of it, is that like I have, with each book I've written, I've gotten better at like having more plot in it and like having more going on, and figuring out the plot of it beforehand. And so like it's getting longer. So yeah, I have a really similar problem to like I just like use too many words when, you know, like you use 20 words when like 5 would do kind of thing. And even like just if I reread a scene right after I've written it, I'm like, I immediately notice it. I'm like, why did I use so many like multiple sentences to describe like this door. Like I could describe it in one sentence. But yeah, I like think it sounds amazing when I'm drafting it. I'm like, oh, all this description, so poetic, and like you need this information. And then I realized like the reader doesn't really need all the information I gave them. So.
Yeah. And I was like almost defensive at first when my agent was like, okay, there's a lot of unnecessary description. I was like, it's not unnecessary. How I write. How dare you? And then I look back and I was like, okay, I guess it's not really how I write, because I've been able to do very sparse prose before. And like looking back, I'm like, okay, I just thought I was artsy at the time, and it can all be cut.
I totally did the same thing. It was when I was in Pitch Wars 2 years ago. And I got to the line editing stage and they were like, cut this, cut this, cut this. And it was like all of my really pretty, you know, are repeating themselves. And I was like, this is my style.
My voice.
Yeah. But then like we worked through it and figured out like ways that you can still have like really stylistic prose and like even purple prose every now and then. And have it be much more impactful because every sentence isn't like that.
That's the thing. And actually that's a really good point, is like you can have like with my repeating thing, I'm like, but it's my style, blah, blah, blah. And I realize that you can still have it, but it just shouldn't be as often as I was putting it in, you know, like once or twice a page, maybe. Like it doesn't have to be once a paragraph. Like settle down, you know.
I like to like do like lists of things a lot of times. Like that's part of my problem, is I'll be like, this thing was this and this and this.
Yeah,
like, I'm like,
that's what I do.
Many times. So like once or twice it's like really cool, but if I do it so many times in like one page, it's like, okay, this is repetitive now. Like every sentence is the same.
I'm so guilty of that, especially when it's a character that's like, it's like internal kind of dialogue almost, and it's like, she was pretty gorgeous, utterly breathtaking, and you're like, okay, take it back to you only need like just relax.
And then like the next sentence is like, she was smart, intelligent. Like they're all like that.
Exactly. Like we get it. Sit down.
It's like just synonyms over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. That was my issue.
Yeah. Or I tend to add in a lot of like qualifiers and stuff. Like so emphasis there. Like I think I get the point across with the one word rather than two words. Yeah.
And which I think sometimes you can do that. Like you can have so it creates a rhythm and it sounds like it emphasizes, but like it should be very deliberate and like I said, like more sprinkled through than like really heavily in every paragraph. So that was my overwriting problem. I could not believe after I was done how much I was actually able to cut, just like going through and taking out the repetitiveness. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess how do we decide with like the stylistic ones? Like, is there a way you can look at it on your own and be like, I don't need this, but I want to keep this one?
It's really hard. Like when because I was very initially, like I said, defensive when she said that, and I was like, that's how I write. And then I'm looking through it, and I'm like, but I think I think it sounds good. But I think what I did was like get some space from it. And like, I think that's why it's important to have like a cooling down or waiting period and then return to your writing in a way that you can look at it with fresh eyes. Cause that's what I did. And as I'm reading it, cause it was slowing the pace down is what it was doing. Cause it was making the narration very slow. And readers just want to get to the story a lot of the time. Like they appreciate good writing, but they don't want to be, shouldn't drag in the exciting scenes because you're trying to describe everything so beautifully, right? And that's what was happening. So it just took me getting some space for my own writing, I think. And when I came back and read it as a story rather than little blips of my writing, like, oh, it's so artistic. I was like, oh no, it's slowing the story down. And that's when I figured out, okay, I do need to stop being in denial and like cut what I should cut, you know?
Yeah.
So gaining perspective.
Yes, I almost always notice things like that when I like read through a whole scene at once.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, if I just read like a paragraph, I'm like, oh, this paragraph's great. But when I like read over a whole scene, I'll immediately be like, why am I using so many words that are not necessary?
Yeah. Sometimes like reading out loud too, or even having someone else read it to you, because it's not your voice anymore. And you're like, oh God, like stop going on and on. Oh, I wrote that. Oops.
over time, you also start to hone in on like specific words that are very much the ones you always fall back on.
Mm.
Do you guys know what your words are?
Yeah, everybody in my manuscript like rolls their eyes or like snorts. They all snort if they're disgusted. She snorted. Like, oh no, 6 times in like the same chapter.
I'm also super guilty of like the phrases that don't need to be that long. Like, she shrugged her shoulders. It's like, you only shrug your shoulders.
What else do you shrug?
Yeah.
He
I
nods
don't
his
need to
head.
specify the body part here.
Yeah.
It's like she pointed with her like hand, and you're like, what else do you point with? Like,
But people don't. The funny thing is, I always see, because I beta read a lot, and I always see she shrugs her shoulders, she nods her head. But I don't see often like he points with his finger, because like that is like next level. Like, oh, I don't want to sound mean, but it's like it's more raw, just learning writing, right? Because most people are just like, oh yeah, he pointed at that said object or whatever. But like nods his head is like a thing I see constantly, even with writers who are quite good, right? So I feel like we just put that in a lot. Yeah, I know I catch myself doing it.
And it's because like you see it in things, so then you do it too. And then
yeah. And it's not a deal breaker. Like if I see that, I'm like, okay, it's just not necessary. And if I need to cut 20,000 words, that's going.
I talk a lot about like my characters breathing.
Yeah.
A lot of like taking like a deep breath or like their breath quickening. Like I talk way too much about how they breathe.
Ooh, heartbeat. That's one for me.
Yes. All heart rates.
It's always their heartbeat and their breath. It's like their heartbeat speeds up and they can't breathe. And
this is how you show emotion.
And then they take deep breaths to calm themselves down every time.
I think it was like my publisher who was like, I know that your character is like anxious, but like this a little over the top, because it was like my first draft, and she was like, it's like she's having a panic attack all the time because her heart's always like beating so hard and she's always like panting for breath. I'm like, oh, okay. I should change this.
I tend to lean on some structural ones as well. I start too many sentences with but, and I can never figure out how to switch it up. I'm like, how do I just say it rather than saying the thing and then the like but part of it? It's always what I struggle with, and I put just in way too many places.
Oh yeah,
just and really, and
for sure. Yeah, a really is another one of mine. There's another word that I really use heavily. What is it? Slightly. I use slightly a lot.
I use a bit or a little bit, which is you don't need a little and you don't need little and bit.
Yeah.
So it's like a double whammy.
Editing videos for this channel actually helps me see what my words are. That like I start so many sentences this particular way, and it does reflect in my writing as well. But and it's easier to take out of writing than it is a video I've already edited.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also sometimes though, like if I notice that I've been like using a certain sentence structure a lot or like starting sentences the same way a lot, then I like start overthinking it and like start finding other ways to write the sentences. And then I realize I haven't even done a sentence in that structure in like an entire book. And like, it's like, and now I've like started using a different structure over and over again. I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot like get it like evened out. I feel like sometimes.
I know I talk about this program all the time, but I love Pro Writing Aid. They should like pay me because I talk about them so much. But again, that's Pro Writing Aid. They have a feature on there when you're going through and proofreading with it, where it tells you which words you've used too many times and gives a suggestion of how many you need to remove to make it a normal amount of uses.
That's a good idea.
And it'll also tell you, like, you started more than 2 sentences in a row with the same word, or you've used the same structure too many times. It's very amazing for line editing.
Can't figure out if that would annoy me or not.
I only do it in line editing because I can't handle it any other time. But
yeah, not when you're drafting, I would assume.
No, but when it comes to line edits, like, I would not survive without it.
Yeah, it's so great. And you can like select which things you want to look for. So, because it has so many features. If you do all of it, it's super overwhelming, but you can just kind of like focus in on what you know you're trouble areas are.
Mm-hmm. So I usually do like one go through during line edits that's just getting rid of words I've used too much, and like one go through then that's like, show me all of the grammar problems.
Kind of cool.
I think a thing that's like really helped me to like identify when I'm like overwriting and using too many words when I could use a lot fewer for something is having had to like write things with word count limits. Like I've like done like an opinion essay that like had to be under, I think like 800 words or something. And I've had to do some stuff for school that's had to be under like 700 words. And so when you have like a really like strict word count limit, you like have to be able to look through it and be like, okay, these words are not necessary. This sentence is repeating the same idea that the sentence before it is. So like just getting that sort of experience wherever you can, where you have to write short things, can really help because you learn to identify the stuff that has to go.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that because I just had a short story I wrote that had to be 500 words, and it was really hard because, like I said, I'm a huge overwriter. So it was like chopping out things that I almost thought were necessary. I was like grinding my teeth doing it. But then when I read it over, I was thinking to myself, oh, this actually really is better than it was before, even though I thought these things were all necessary, you know? So
I think sometimes when you cut some of it out, it allows the reader to like make more interpretations themselves. You know, like sometimes I think when you are overwriting in your prose, you're like making it too easy for the reader and telling them like everything.
Not trusting the reader. Yeah.
Even if you're not telling, you're like showing them too many things instead of just giving them like one sentence and letting them like get it from that, you know?
Yeah. Well, with mine too, it was a horror piece as well. So it's supposed to be punchy and like scary and like high action. So I was not doing myself any favors by trying to be more flowery. So like the more words I cut out, the punchier and more impactful it became, right? So and especially in your action scenes is when you really, they can suffer if you're an overwriter like me.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was also going to ask, since we've talked a lot about, because this is definitely something you have to fix in revisions. Like, it's like I said, if you try to focus on it too much while you're drafting, you'll just like get stuck. Which happens to me, where I'm like, I have to make sure that I'm writing it correctly and not using too many words. And then like, I can't write it all because of it, because I'm overthinking it. But how do you approach word count and revisions? Do you like usually have a goal for a certain amount of words that you want to add or delete, or just like general, I need to cut back on these things, I need to flesh out scenes?
Well, for me, it's like it's not my choice, unfortunately. It's usually either my editor or my agent being like, you have to get it down to 80,000 words or like the bare minimum I have to get it down to. And then, and then I sulk and pout and then eventually cut a bunch of words. So it's usually around like 80,000 words. Yeah, 85 is the sweet spot for YA or whatever often.
Yeah, it's kind of the same for me. Like, my agent usually is like, make sure it doesn't go over, like in our most recent call, she was like, make sure it isn't over 80,000. And during the second draft, like where I'm doing my first round of revisions, I don't really think about that at all because I just want to fix all of the problems first without stressing about the word count. And then once I get into like third draft, line edits and all of that, that's when I start to really think about like, is it too short? Do I need to beef it up? Is it too long? Do I need to cut down?
Yeah, I don't generally, like, I have a specific word count in mind going into a project. Like, I know how many chapters I want to be, more or less what genre it is, how long it should be. But by the end, it's pretty much, it is what it is. So I'm the boss of me.
No one puts Kelly in a corner.
Kelly should really put Kelly in a corner.
favorite questions.
Do like shorter lengths like tend to do better in indie pubbing? Like, have you noticed anything that way?
Specifically, longer would probably be better because a lot of my books are in Kindle Unlimited right now, so you're getting paid by the page. So, but even then, like indie books tend to be a bit on the shorter side compared to like you see a lot less in terms of like big fantasy books that are like 80,000 is a pretty standard adult or YA. You see a lot of it, but there's a market for both of them. It really depends on genre, like anything else. Just meeting reader expectations.
Feel free to ask any over and underwriting themed questions in the discussion section, and we will try to answer them.
So do we have any actual underwriters? Yeah, some
Kelly.
of you guys. Yeah.
Kelly's a definite underwriter.
Yeah. So like most of us know why we are overwriting. Have you pinned down what it is that makes you underwrite or what you are underwriting specifically?
I think for me, a lot of it is like plot is never the issue. I just move too quickly from thing to thing. Like I don't stay in a moment long enough. So that could be adding description or giving the characters a little more time to digest what's just happened rather than, all right, now let's on to the next thing.
Right. Which is probably like technically what you would call pacing, right? Like
scene level pacing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So funny because mine is like the opposite. It's like I stay in each moment way too long, so the word count looks like a normal length book, but nothing is happening by the end of the first draft.
No, I sometimes have a similar problem as Kelly because like I think when I'm drafting, especially since I write slower, like I feel like I've been in the scene for too long. I'm like, oh, I got to keep this moving. And then like I go back and read it and I'm like, oh, this scene is really quick and really short. But it seemed so long when I was writing it.
But also for me, like romance is a big for writing it. I'm like, I never want to stay in those moments. I like having written them, but just in writing them, I'm like, I don't know what else to do. They're looking at each other.
For me, I think it's like anything with action because like I'm like it's got to keep moving, but then it like happens too quickly, and I'm like, oh, not enough happened in it, and I didn't like linger on anything enough.
Yeah, that's probably one for me as well. Of like, I've read a lot of advice about like not overly being over specific in like the punch by punch of a fight, so I was like, and then they fought, let's move on.
It's like this really big climactic scene and it just like happens really fast. This person won, there you go.
I can actually do that because I sometimes have trouble, not so much with like my witchy ones, which I've been doing recently, but like particularly for like physical battle scenes, I can find those very, very hard to describe in a way that isn't too fast or too slow, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to find a balance.
Yeah. It's not like I've been in a battle before. Like
yeah, because you want the reader to feel like this is this like fast-paced battle, but you also don't want to gloss over everything. Yeah.
So those can,
and you want the characters to like have time to react in it and stuff. You don't want
And
it to just be like a description of a fight and nothing else.
Yeah, because like when I'm reading books, I will like skim over a lot of descriptions of fights, but just because I don't like to read it doesn't mean it isn't important to the story and that people should have the option if they want to. But like a lot of it for me is just like nerves and tension of like, okay, did anyone I love die? Let's skip to the end. Okay, now I can kind of fill in the blanks.
I'm always struck too by like how little I actually know about fighting, and like I feel like I know probably more than the average person does about fighting. Like I took karate for a decent amount of time, but I get to like a fight scene and it's like I don't know anything about axes from the medieval ages. Like now I have to spend half an hour watching YouTube videos where these guys with beards tell me how axes work.
And I'm like, she's swings the sword, and then the other person blocks it, and then she swings again. And
that's what I struggle with.
backwards.
Yeah. I'm like, why is this interesting?
It's like I just don't know how to describe it. You know?
Clash together.
Yeah.
And then
Like,
again.
Playing of swords.
No.
It's so
That's
hard
why
to use
I'm
all
like-
the senses when you haven't experienced it, because it's like it's
Yeah.
boring if you just say they did this and then they did this and then they did this.
Yeah.
So you have to like channel the smells and the sounds and all of it. And it's like, I don't know what that smells or sounds like.
And then through all of it, their hearts are racing and they're breathing really hard.
Yes.
And you always like know where you need the fight to end up. Like you're like, I know I need this person to like fall, but you're like, how do I get them there? Like, how do they like realistically like?
They get poked once and they're like, oh no.
Yeah, that's why they all just blast each other with magic at this point. Works a lot better.
We've got a question from Helen. When I write, I tend to skip over the detail of a setting because I always feel I'm putting too much in, although in reality, it's the opposite. How do you guys show setting without going overboard?
Put it in where it's plot relevant. Like your character is always interacting with things around them and stuff, so you can add in little details based on things that are happening anyway.
Baby. Yeah, I really like doing that because I also don't like to like, as much as said is like an invisible word, I would much rather have someone do an action as they speak rather than like she said, he said, she said, he said. So it's like it could be like she set her glass down on the counter beside her and then she says something, right? Like obviously written better than what I just said, but like, and it also helps describe, okay, you know, she's standing in the kitchen, which maybe you'd already know that, but you know that there's an island that she's standing beside in the center of the kitchen, like that type of thing, right? So, and it reminds the readers too, oh yeah, they're in the kitchen, they're by the counter, they're having a talk at breakfast or whatever. So that's like a little, you can dribble that through every scene basically.
I also think like, especially if you're writing like fantasy or sci-fi and it's something that the reader isn't, the setting that they're not going to be familiar with, like it's okay to like occasionally like take some time to describe something. I think a lot of times we get like scared of that and we're like, oh no, I can't like slow down the story to like talk about like what this place looks like. But like as long as you're not like Tolkiening it and like spending like 5 pages describing a mountain, like you're probably okay if you have like a paragraph describing like what the castle looks like or something. Like
It's easier
you're probably not
too
gonna lose
when
readers in that one paragraph. Yeah.
when your characters are new to the place. Like in Harry Potter, you can get into all the descriptions because Harry's feeling so much awe about all of the things that he's seeing. So like he really is observing all of these things. So the reader gets to do that too. It's definitely trickier when it's somewhere the character's super familiar with and they're just like, yeah, I'm home. I don't need to think about what is here.
Yeah, I like stuff like referring to the character's relationship with the place. For example, if that character, it's their home, they lived in it all their life. It's like, oh, they don't want to leave the warmth of the fireplace to go outside into the cold, or like describe how cozy the room is. Like they're like a homebody because their home is like such and such, or like they're at military academy. Oh, you know, Sharon never got used to the cold, sterile halls and the dark windows outside. Like you can still work that in, even if they're familiar with the place.
Yeah,
And also
there's actually one.
Even if your character's familiar with the place, like your readers aren't. So like it's okay to give them like a little bit of information about it.
But temperature is what I've been thinking about more and more recently because it's something I am always so aware of in myself, no matter where. I'm like, I'm not paying attention to what things smell like, but
especially with winter coming. Yeah,
Yeah.
winter is coming. Yep.
But I definitely find that like balancing like how much setting description to use is something that I can do a lot better in revisions. For
Absolutely.
Because I always feel like I'm slowing it down too much when I put it in a first draft. But then when I like look back later, I'm like, no, it would be okay to put this like paragraph in here describing like this place she's like walked into or something. So yeah,
setting isn't one of my huge weaknesses, but it is something that I fix after my first draft very commonly, because when I read through again, then I'll be like, okay, like we're getting the white room effect here. Like we need to know as a reader where they're standing, what this room looks like. I did that when I was describing the characters were in this kitchen, and we know it's a farmhouse and we know they're in a kitchen, but we don't really know what the kitchen looks like. And I'd realized I was basing it off a farmhouse that my friend grew up in and that I'd been in many times. So I had a very clear picture in my head what it looked like, which meant I had kind of skipped over describing any of it at all. So I went back and I was like, okay, I have to describe, you know, the table is not a table. It's basically just like a long plank propped up on logs. And like, there's like pictures hanging crooked on the wall and like 62 jars of jam on the counter because the mom is always canning. And like, these are descriptions that, fill in little gaps, and then your reader can be like, okay, farmhouse, these are all the details of the kitchen, and then they can picture maybe a kitchen that they've seen in a farmhouse somewhere, and that's what that becomes in their mind, you know.
One of the things I like to do as well to kind of like play around with that and make the setting stronger and everything is bring in a character who is not familiar with the setting. Like even if your main character is at home, bring in a friend who hasn't been into their home yet. Because I feel like when you bring a friend over to your house for the first time, you get like hyper aware of all the things they're looking at. Like, did they notice this? And so not only does it show the setting more, it also shows like what things your character is self-conscious about and what they're afraid of.
Totally. Yeah, I remember bringing friends over to like the old houses because we used to rent these old houses. And I remember bringing friends over and being like, oh God, like it's like old and drafty and the carpets are mustard colored from the 70s. Like, what are they? And I would definitely be suddenly more aware of like, oh, you know, are they looking at it like, oh God, this place is ugly? Like,
do they think it's cozy like I do, or do they think it's dumpy?
They think it's tacky and awful, you know. Yeah. Definitely.
We had another question from Angerswald. How do you attack tick words? I use just and that far too often.
Just being aware of what you use and going back through with revisions. Mercilessly slashing them all out of your manuscript.
And when you know your words, like you can just search for that specific word and have like a, because then you're seeing like how close together you're using that word on one page, and so knowing them is already a good chunk of the battle.
Yeah, for sure.
And probably a good percentage of them are not necessary. So,
especially if the word that is one of your words, which it probably is because it's a word that we all tend to insert where it doesn't need to be. But yeah, so just like Control F the word that, and you can get rid of like 90% of them probably.
Another good thing to look for, and I know I put this in and many of my writer friends did, is filtering words. So filtering sensations, visuals through the character is, so she saw this. She smelled that. She thought this. So any word that means that, basically, just chop it and have her directly see that. So instead of she saw across the room, blah, 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 was doing this, it would be across the room, blah, 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 was doing this, right? Because if you're kind of filtering that through those words rather than directly through the character, which is what your reader should be feeling like they are the character and seeing what the character is seeing.
Yeah, because like if it's written down that so-and-so was doing this thing across the room, obviously the character is seeing it.
Yes, exactly. The POV is the character. That's always a great thing to look for to cut because it will make your writing stronger and cut some of the words down if you're like me and you need to do that.
And it's another one of those things that when you only use it sparingly, it has more of an effect, you know, because then you start to realize the times where you like actually need it for some reason. Like you need to show that it's something your character is experiencing and something your character's noticing maybe that no one else is, that sort of thing. But you probably don't need like 95% of the time you use it. You probably don't need it. So.
Yeah, if you use it, it should be deliberate and it should be a choice for a reason. Yeah, for sure.
We had another question. What is your #1 tip to boost a word count? I love adding subplots in my second draft, but I'm also terrible at making sure those subplots wrap up. Haha.
Haha.
Yeah, if you're looking to add a lot, a subplot is definitely a good but challenging way to go.
I love a good subplot, especially when it's like, here I go again, but especially when it's micro tension between the characters, or like backbiting and backstabbing and like, oh, what's she gonna say to him next? And just like any kind of tension between characters is like my favorite subplot of all time. And I really feel like even if the main plot isn't, like, I'm reading this story right now, which shall remain unnamed, and I'm not a huge fan of the main plot of it. I'm like, even though lots of things are going on, but there's kind of like this subplot that I'm just glued to. And I almost want to skip like the main plot, just be like, what happens next in the other plot? So like, even if you haven't completely captured readers with the main plot, sometimes a subplot can be fascinating. So yeah.
The biggest pain with those, though, is that you have to usually go through and it affects every scene.
Yeah. It should tie into the end or before the end. And yeah, it is a lot of work, but it is a great thing to add words if you're an underwriter.
I almost always have to go back in and add 1 or 2 subplots. Also, for me, world building is one where I can typically add quite a bit word count wise, because I definitely run into like the white room syndrome, or like every room just looks like a random house in suburbia, even though it's like a high fantasy world, because I just haven't described all of the little details that should be there in a really strong fantasy world. So I always, after the first draft, I have to go back and be like, okay, so what is this world that I've created, and like create a world building Bible of all the things that are in the book versus like all the things that I need to be in the book. It takes a long time, but I mean, everything takes a long time in book writing. So
like with fantasy in particular, as a reader, I want to feel like very immersed into the world. So like when it's just like a generic fantasy world, it's like one of the worst things you can do in a fantasy book. I don't care how like good your plot is, but if the world just feels really generic, it's like not going to be like a 5-star read, you know?
For sure. Jody asked if any of us have used Grammarly and if that will help with overwriting.
I haven't, but I know people who use it.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with it.
I don't know if it would help with overwriting. It might say if you've repeated words, like if it's anything like a normal, like a word type grammar correction.
I think it's kind of like Pro Writing Aid, where it would show you like you're using certain sentence structures too much or certain words too much. I think it does that sort of thing.
So it might help with that.
It does. It's more than just like a spell check.
Yeah. I think it's just more focused on grammar, obviously, like the rules of writing, than general like nice to-dos. That
honestly, like the main thing I think that will help with an overwriter is getting beta readers that will tell you what you're doing wrong, and help you realize that, you know, as well as, because it could be something like, hey, you spend way too long like describing the character's emotion. There's like way too much internal dialogue, and something like Grammarly is probably not going to catch that because it's not like a craft issue. So, or what do I want to say? My brain is just short-circuited.
It's not technically wrong.
Thank you. That is not it's not a technical problem. Thank you, Megan. My brain was like, no, shutting down. You don't need that word.
Yeah, I feel like every week we're like, so your problem will be solved with a beta reader. But it's so true.
So we can quit now. It's our only advice is get beta readers. The end.
I would not survive without beta readers.
It's true. Yeah, honestly, if you get a good beta reader, hang on to them. They will take your book to the next level. My book would not be ready without Megan and Emma and the various other people that read it as well. And pointed out, hey, and Kelly, who pointed out, hey, you're showing and then telling, and then telling, and then telling. Especially people that can be with you through like multiple books, you know what I mean? And that is when they often pick up on your patterns, your smaller and larger ones.
Yeah, for sure. That's part of why, especially for like early chapters, I love, we have a writing group, and we've had this group for years now, probably like, oh my gosh, 6 or 7 years. And we'll like share chapters with each other, and usually it's like the beginnings of a book. But they're able to like watch the story evolve and like help you get the openings as good as possible, and you catch problems that are like symptoms of something that's going to be a bigger problem in the future. Like, oh, you have this plot hole that like you need this subplot, otherwise the story's not going to make sense, or you are telling us too much and not doing enough or something. And I love catching those things as early as possible when like underwriting is a problem in particular, because it's like it's much easier to start the subplots partway into the first draft rather than to go through in the second draft and inject all of them.
I wonder if there's such thing as somebody who doesn't underwrite or overwrite and is just perfect every time. That would be nice.
The perfect first draft.
I think a lot of the people who do well there are the ones who go above and beyond with outlining. Like if you already know what description you already need to put in this scene, and you have all of that worked out, and you know beat by beat what's happening in terms of pacing and plot. So you're doing the work ahead of time in order to avoid.
It just like blows my mind. I don't know how you can know all of that beforehand. Like I can't. I just don't know.
I don't.
Someone did
I really don't like that idea.
Recently about like how they like write, like it was about like endings. It was the author of This Mortal Coil. I don't know her name, but about like I guess like someone asked about how she keeps readers turning the page, and she's talking about how you end scenes, and she said like when like how she plots. She does an index card for every scene with like what the last sentence of the scene is going to be. I'm like, how do you know that much beforehand?
Oh my God.
I don't even know what all the scenes are going to be.
That's crazy. It was like the guys from the self-publishing podcast, the amount that they plot. I don't know which ones anymore, but like 2 of them, they like literally go beat by beat. It's like chapter 1, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I'm like, that's too structured for me. Like I need to have a rough idea what's happening through like each scene kind of like vaguely, but like to have the actual beats of like he walks here and then he picks up this, and then it's almost like they after they're finished they have most of the story and just need to put some of the details in. Right? Like, I don't know. That's a weird way of doing it.
Not weird, just different.
I just like, there's something about it that I'm just like, no.
My brain just does not wrap around it.
No.
Well, I'm also bad at that sort of thing, even when I try to do it, because I'll be like, oh, this scene, like, this thing is going to happen. And then, like, when I get to it, I realize that that thing will actually take, like, 3 scenes or something. But, like, for some reason, like, when I was plotting it, I was like, oh, yeah, that'll happen in one quick scene. And I'm like, oh, no, this actually is, like, really drawn out.
I feel like
it's how going on than I realized would be going on.
Yeah, it's, like, how your brain works, I think. That you have to find a way that works for you and how you think about story, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I definitely find, though, that outlining more and more is very useful when you're on a tight deadline. And so like I've had to find a way to strike that balance between like I just want to see where it takes me and like no, I really need to know where this is going because it needs to be wrapped up in a few weeks. And so what I like to do is I'll outline like a few chapters ahead, like very, very specifically, like this is what's going to happen in this chapter, ... And then, okay, well, in the next chapter, this is what's going to happen, ... And then I can like cruise through those 3 chapters and then like take a look at where the story has taken me.
That's a good idea.
All while still knowing like the general arc of where I want the story to be going, but leaving a little bit of room for the smaller details.
I definitely have to have enough wiggle room for, this sounds dumb, but for my characters to like surprise me. You know what I mean? If it's like, oh my God, I think this character is going to do this. And like, I feel like if I didn't see it coming, my readers are also not necessarily going to see it coming. Like, and then I can go back and put hints in it so that it makes sense. But I think it makes for a really good kind of unexpected plot twists. And if I plan everything out too much in detail, I think it comes off very almost like stilted.
But the thing to keep in mind with any level of outlining is it's not set in stone. Like anyone, even people I know who do big, big outlines, the outline does change as you're writing the story. Like this is your idea of kind of a map of where you're going, but things are going to kind of go off the rails and change a little bit. And either you're just going to start winging it or you're going to adjust your outline accordingly. But it's not, you know, you've outlined it, now it has to be this way.
Or you're fired. Yeah.
Yeah. And also like the hardcore outliners are good at coming up with like what those plot twists are going to be before they've written out everything. Like they
it surprises them in the outlining.
Yeah, it just surprises them earlier than the pantsers.
Okay, Kelly, I have to ask what your shirt says.
Please don't make me do stuff.
I like it. There was one writer at the writer's retreat who's wearing a t-shirt that says, "First I have the coffee, then I do the things." And I'm like, I also like that shirt.
I have another one that says, "Sorry, I can't. I have plans with the internet," which is usually a pretty good WordNerds one, but I've just busted out the fall shirts again.
I feel like that's accurate.
I want to bust out my fall shirts. It's still 90 degrees.
Oh my God.
It's really hot in Celsius.
So hot.
Yeah,
it's actually nice during the day. It's just cold here at night. Like I went for a kayak in the afternoon, but now it's cold.
It's still hot at night here.
You went for a kayak? Is that what you just said? So you do
I like
the
nature
things.
now. I already did things today. I'm done.
See, I don't even do like I'm like outside. No, what is that? I don't do things. I write about things. I don't do them. Maybe not a good philosophy in life, but
we've got some good writing podcasts recommended in the discussion section, like Story Grid, The Writer's Well, and Career Author from Jody.
Oh, I used to listen to Story Grid. It was a good one.
That reminds me, this is a little off topic, but I've been listening to the First Draft podcast with Somaya Daoud.
Yes,
and it's so good.
It's really good. Her publishing journey. It's been a wild ride.
It's wild.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she wrote Mirage, which just came out not too long ago. And the interview with her is amazing, and there's so much Star Wars prequel fangirling. I didn't know I wanted, but it was like taking me back to like 13-year-old Megan, who had like a poster of Anakin on her wall.
Oh my gosh. Oh man.
Because Mirage is it's a lot like the part. So basically, the main character is a Padme to the queen or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she's like
she's a Padme.
What's the word I'm looking for?
not body double, which is the first word that came to mind.
Yeah. But essentially a body double.
Yeah.
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 Can't think of the right word.
Basically.
Mhm.
Words are hard.
She looks just like
She looks just like the princess and is sent into dangerous situations that would not be safe for the princess. And there's romance with people for whom she should not be falling.
I know. After listening to that episode, I was like, I have to read this book.
I need this book now.
It's like every episode of First Draft podcast, even like books I normally wouldn't read. After listening to the author talk about it, I'm like, I need this.
I need to know.
I have to read it. They sound like a great person. I have to read their book.
Doppelganger.
Yeah.
Ellie recommended that word.
It's a good word. It's a great word.
Yes. Do we have any other things we should discuss? Over and underwriting?
So, been going for almost an hour.
Definitely a thing that everyone has to deal with.
Yeah.
There's always going to be something missing from your book and something that you have too much of.
Next week, we are doing our book club.
Yeah.
We are reading / are finishing up reading Queen of the Tierling by Erica Johansson. And we're going to be talking all about it. I think it's going to be a really good discussion. There will be no spoilers for books 2 and 3, just book 1. So you don't have to read the whole series to come to the chat. It's going to be good.
Yep. So I guess that's it for tonight. We will see you guys next Sunday and all throughout the week with our videos. So thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.